Hello and welcome to this week's video. If you're interested in the paranormal, folklore, scary stories, ghost stories, go ahead and hit subscribe, maybe like this video, because that's what I do on this channel. Today I'm going to be talking about the Greyfriars Kirkyard, which is a cemetery in Edinburgh, Scotland. So let's get into it. What is the Greyfriars Kirkyard? Well, the Greyfriars Kirkyard is nestled in the heart of Edinburgh, Scotland. This graveyard isn't just where the dead find rest, it's where the living come to lose their peace of mind. Greyfriars holds such a grim reputation as the most haunted graveyard in the world, which is a bold claim, but some of the stories that you hear and that you read about when researching this, it kind of has legs. Regardless of what you hear about the Greyfriars, at the centre of all of these tales looms one name, and that is Sir George Mackenzie and the legend of the Mackenzie Poltergeist. Sir George Mackenzie was no ordinary man. In life, he was a 17th century judge, and he was infamous for his cruelty towards the Covenanters, who were a group of Scottish Presbyterians, and these weren't swift or clean prosecutions. Mackenzie sentenced them to unimaginable suffering, starvation, disease, and in most cases, death. But whatever their fate, when Mackenzie convicted these people, they were sent away to die in a part of what is now the Greyfriars Kirkyard Cemetery, and it's a specific part called the Covenanters Prison. During Mackenzie's, I suppose you could call it, reign, he convicted over 1,000 people. It's roughly around 1,200 people he sentenced to die. And the irony of all of this is that when Mackenzie passed away in 1691, they erected this huge Black Mausoleum for him to be, as his tomb, for his remains to go to. And where was it? In the Covenanters Prison, right in the centre of Greyfriars Kirkyard. But for centuries, his tomb remained completely undisturbed. Well, that was, after all, until one night in 1998. It was the heart of winter, and a homeless man wandering the streets of Edinburgh, rather than freeze to death, decided, there's a building, that looks warm and unoccupied, it's a tomb, but rather that than the cold streets of Edinburgh, sure. The problem is that when he broke in there to stay the night, he somehow, no one's quite sure whether it was an accident or what, but he disturbed Mackenzie's remains. And ever since that night, there has been no end of reports of paranormal activity in the Greyfriars Kirkyard. There have been reports of violent attacks, and they just started pouring in. People walk around there, they come out with scratches, bruises, burns, even broken bones, and these have all been documented. And for some people, this isn't specifically just maintained to the graveyard. People, after visiting and experiencing paranormal activity at Greyfriars, have reported that they are followed home by something. But perhaps the creepiest thing of all is that almost every single person who steps foot on the kirkyard gets the sensation of being watched. But one of the main reasons that the Greyfriars Kirkyard is considered one of the most haunted graveyards in the world, if not the most haunted graveyard in the world, is largely down to the case of Colin Grant. Colin Grant's very unfortunate circumstance is probably why a lot of people consider this place to be beyond haunted and more so dangerous. And that's simply because he died. Colin Grant was a local minister, and he was very, very much on the spiritual side of things and considered himself an exorcist. And apparently he had performed exorcisms as well, you know. If locals bought a old house and thought, oh, there's something a bit spooky in here, we'll go get Colin Grant and he'll burn a stick of sage and clear out the ghosts. Well, that's exactly what he had planned for the Greyfriars Kirkyard, only it didn't end well. One night in the late 90s, after countless reports of alleged hauntings and things going on in the graveyard, Colin was tired of it. He was sick of it, and he thought his local community was being plagued by something truly evil and sinister. So one night he stands there before the press with a Bible in his hand, and he declared that the spirits would be banished from the graveyard. But days later, he was dead. He just died. And no one really knew why. His official cause of death was a sudden, unexplained illness just days after performing this exorcism, and by all accounts, he was a healthy guy. Something didn't quite add up. And this obviously added a lot of fuel to the flames of the Mackenzie Poltergeist legend. By this point, it had become a legend. All the locals believe that Mackenzie wasn't ready to let go of this disturbing and dark reign that he had over the Greyfriars. After all, you have to remember that in life, he sentenced people to die here. He was the king of this area, and he allegedly took a lot of pleasure in these executions. He was known as Bluidy Mackenzie. He wasn't a just man at all. He was a violent man with a horrid reputation, and he took genuine joy in sentencing these people to death. The very fact that he was buried there just goes to show the levels of his narcissism. So the locals believe that this is his house. This is where he is. He's not going to move for anybody. He has come back from the dead, and he's terrifying everybody. So when we look at this in, you know, a sense of a haunted place, and when we look at it in terms of like folklore and legends and horror stories, you kind of start asking questions. Well, what about the land itself? We have all these stories of like ancient haunted graveyards and burial mounds, typically places where there's been great tragedy. There's a lot of old places in England and Scotland that were mentioned in the Doomsday Book where people were just wiped out. The whole village and community were just completely destroyed or decimated by like the Black Plague. And we have these huge mounds. And now in present day, there's stories of hauntings. And so people started thinking, well, what about this graveyard? You know, yeah, there's hundreds and hundreds of people buried here, but it's a graveyard. But the suffering that went on here is pretty much unparalleled to any resting place out there. According to locals, the land itself is a place where bones refuse to stay buried, and during heavy rains, visitors have reported seeing human remains poking through the earth, as if the graveyard's tragic past is just bubbling up to the surface. And many people believe that Mackenzie actually draws his power from the restless dead, sort of their torment feeding his rage. And therein lies the question, the real question, which is this the work of a vengeful ghost, or is this something far darker? Because some say the Greyfriars isn't haunted by Mackenzie alone, but the echoes of the 1,200 Covenanters who suffered and died there, their screams trapped in the grounds beneath. So if you ever do find yourself in Edinburgh, walking past these ancient gates, ask yourself, are you brave enough to step inside? Are you ready to face the legend of Bluidy Mackenzie? Thanks for watching this week's video. If you liked it, please go ahead and click like. If you want to see more stuff like this, go ahead and hit subscribe. And please let me know your thoughts on the Greyfriars Kirkyard in the comments below.